Part 1. Introduction and setting the scene. What was it really like to live in Lagos in the 1980s? Picture this. The sound of danfo buses honking endlessly, the smell of roasted corn mixing with the salty breeze from the Atlantic, and the sight of street hawkers balancing trays of groundnut cigarettes and fan yogo on their heads while dodging impatient taxi drivers. Lagos, even then, was a city that never slept. The 1980s in Nigeria were years of contradictions. Oil money had flowed strongly in the 1970s, creating a dream of prosperity. But by the mid-1980s, the country faced economic decline. The Naira began to lose its golden strength, and military governments changed hands like passing storms. Yet in the midst of this political and economic turbulence, Lagosians continued to live, hustle, and survive with that unique energy only Lagos could provide. Life in Lagos was not just about hardship or wealth, it was about rhythm. The rhythm of Afrobeat spilling out from smoky nightclubs in Surulere, the rhythm of gospel choirs in Mushin churches, the rhythm of market women shouting prices at Balogun Market, and the rhythm of generators humming when NEPA as usual took light. People came to Lagos from every corner of Nigeria: Igbo traders, Hausa cattle sellers, Yoruba artisans, and countless migrants from nearby West African countries. This made the city a melting pot of cultures, languages, and dreams.
I will take 3.
To live in Lagos in the 1980s was to live in a place where tomorrow was never guaranteed, but the hustle of today was certain. And yet, beneath the chaos, there was a sense of community. Neighbors in crowded face-me-I-face-you houses shared water, kerosene, and stories late into the night. Children played football on sandy streets with makeshift balls wrapped in nylon bags. Families gathered around small black and white televisions to watch the Village Headmaster or NTA's evening news. This was the Lagos of the 1980s, noisy, crowded, sometimes harsh, but always alive. The question is, what made the people who lived through that era so resilient? And who were the characters that shaped the Lagos story during those turbulent years? Part 2. The People and Foundations of Lagos in the 1980s. To understand Lagos in the 1980s, you must first understand its people, the lifeblood of the city. Lagos was not just a place, it was a character on its own. And those who lived in it carried the spirit of survival, creativity, and noise. First, there were the market women. You could not talk about Lagos without talking about them. From Balogun to Idumota, from Mile 12 to Oyingbo, they were the heartbeat of daily life. Wrapped in colorful iro and buba, their voices rose above the clatter of coins and bargaining. These women were not just sellers. They were bankers for families, breadwinners, and sometimes even political voices. In a time when the economy was tightening, their ability to stretch every naira kept homes alive. Then, there were the danfo drivers and conductors. Yellow buses with black stripes became moving symbols of Lagos. Enter one at Ojuelegba, and you would hear the conductor's loud cry, Oshodi, CMS, Obalende. The journey was always a struggle. Too many passengers squeezed in, quarrels over change, sudden breaks. But those buses kept Lagos moving. Without them, the city would stop breathing. In the evenings, the musicians and entertainers brought life. Afrobeat legend Fela Anikulapo Kuti was at the height of his activism and artistry. At the Africa Shrine, crowds gathered to listen, dance, and sometimes get arrested when the soldiers raided. Beyond Fela, Juju musicians like King Sunny Ade and Ebenezer Obey filled parties with melodies that lifted spirits despite economic challenges. Music in Lagos was not just for entertainment. It was a form of survival, a way to forget hardship for a while. And in the neighborhoods, you found the ordinary Lagosians, tailors working from small kiosks, teachers striking for better pay, young graduates looking for scarce jobs, and children running errands for their parents. Every street had its own drama. Every compound had its own characters, the nosy neighbor, the prayer warrior, the struggling father, and the dreamer always talking about traveling abroad. Cultural life was everywhere. Weddings were grand even when pockets were small. Burials turned into community feasts. Football united streets as children cheered for Rangers International or stationery stores FEC. Even the way people dressed in the 1980s, bell-bottom trousers, afro hairstyles, shiny lace materials, carried the swagger of a city that refused to be defeated. To live in Lagos then was to be part of a restless theater. Every day, the people acted out their roles with energy, sometimes with anger, but always with hope. It was a city where nobody waited for government promises. If NEPA failed, you found kerosene. If jobs disappeared, you started trading. If food prices rose, you looked for cheaper alternatives. The people were the true foundation of Lagos in the 1980s, and without them, the city would have collapsed under its many struggles. But then came the storms, events that would shake the city and test its resilience like never before. Part 3. The Turning Points and Dramatic Events. If the people were the foundation of Lagos, then the storms of the 1980s were the real test of their strength. Lagos never had a quiet day. Each year carried its own drama. One of the biggest realities was military rule. Nigeria in the 1980s was under a rotating cast of military leaders. Shagari was overthrown in 1983. Buhari came with his iron discipline, and by 1985, Babangida had taken over. Lagosians felt these changes not in theory, but in daily life. Suddenly, you would see soldiers on the streets enforcing curfews, seizing smuggled goods, and chasing illegal hawkers. Decrees from Dodon barracks in Ikoyi shaped the rhythm of the city. Perhaps the most unforgettable part of Buhari's rule was the war against indiscipline. In Lagos, it meant queues at bus stops had to be orderly, or soldiers would flog you into line. Street trading was banned, yet Lagosians found ways to sneak around. People whispered about how harsh the punishments were, but still, Lagosians survived with laughter, sarcasm, and resilience. Then came the economic shocks. By the mid-1980s, oil prices crashed, and the naira began to fall. Lagos, the commercial capital, felt the heat immediately. Import restrictions meant fewer goods in the market. Families had to switch from rice to gari, from meat to fish, from luxury to survival. At Balogun Market, traders adjusted quickly. Smuggling and second-hand goods, takunbo, became the new lifeline. But Lagos was never only about hardship. There was also resistance, culture, and creativity. At the Africa Shrine, Fela Kuti used his music to attack the military government. His songs, like fire, carried the anger of the people. Raids on his home in Ikeja became legendary as soldiers stormed Calacuta Republic and clashed with his followers. For young Lagosians, Fela was not just a musician, he was a symbol of defiance. Beyond politics and economy, Lagos also faced urban struggles. Overcrowding turned housing into a daily battle. In Mushin and Ajagunle, whole families squeezed into one-room apartments. Flooding during rainy season turned roads into rivers. Traffic jams, go-slows, were already part of life, with commuters spending hours between Oshodi and CMS. Yet even in the gridlock, life continued. Hawkers sold plantain chips, drivers cracked jokes, passengers argued about politics. The 1980s also brought waves of student protests and workers' strikes. University students in Lagos marched against tuition hikes and government neglect. NLC, Nigeria Labor Congress, called strikes that paralyzed offices. On the streets, Lagosians debated loudly about corruption, fuel scarcity, and the future of Nigeria.
It's unbelievable what's happening.
Through all this, the city never lost its pulse. Lagosians were like dancers in a storm, dodging, adjusting, but never stopping.
3 coins.
For every government crackdown, there was a new hustle. For every hardship, a new rhythm of survival emerged. By the end of the decade, Lagos had seen it all: military discipline, economic decline, cultural resistance, and endless struggles of daily life. But the question remained: after the chaos of the 1980s, what was the true cost on ordinary Lagosians? How did society react, adapt, or break under the pressure?